You are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
This episode of Rootbound is brought to you by ranunculus. Is it a horrible monster or a terrible disease? No, that's ridiculous. It's ranunculus, a pretty flower.
Hey everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of Rootbound. I'm the host of the podcast, and my name is Steve. And Rootbound is the podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside. And each week, I invite a guest to share with us all about a plant that means something to them. And then I share with the guest about a plant that means something to me. And through this process, we can all learn more about plants and learn more about each other. Now, after talking to the guest that you're about to hear from on this week's episode, I got to thinking about why are things sour? That's the thought process I had in my mind. And so I thought I would do a little research and share that with you about why do things taste sour? And it turns out that plants have a lot to do with it. Most things that we eat that taste sour have their origins in organic acids that are part of plants. So good examples of those are malic acid or citric acid or tartaric acid. Malic acid is common in apples and other fruits like that. Citric acid, citrus fruit, and then tartaric acid is in wine. It's one of the things that makes wine taste sour. There's some other things like mineral-based acids like phosphoric acid that also taste sour. Also, sparkling water tastes sour, and that's simply because of the CO2 dissolved in the water, which also makes the water acidic and therefore have a sour taste. So sour and acidity go hand in hand. But one interesting thing I found, and this is all coming from a publication called Chemical Senses by Martin Kohlmeier that I found. I'll leave a link in the show notes. But one thing that I found that was pretty interesting is that even though acidic things taste sour, our tongue is not just a pH meter. Things don't taste more sour because they are more acidic. There's more going on to that, and our tongue is I think, keying into specific things about those acids and not necessarily just their acidity, because they've done tests. And for example, acetic acid tastes way more sour than other acids at a similar pH. So that's pretty interesting because acetic acid is not one of the ones that's origins are directly in plants. Acetic acid comes from a biological fermentation process, so plant matter often being fermented by bacteria. But it's interesting that our tongue tastes acetic acid more acidic than other acids. I thought that was pretty interesting. And yeah, that's why things taste sour. It has to do with acidity, but not so directly. So cool stuff. And with that, let's meet our guest.
So sour, you'll get sucked in by the taste. It's lip-puckering sour, tongue-twisting tangy, face-scrunching tart.
Hi, Shane. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Oh, yeah, no problem. It's great to be on here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Do you have a plant to share with us today?
I do. I was looking through some of the catalog that some people have chosen. You already picked some amazing plants that I looked through. So
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know which one to pick.
It's getting a bit of a challenge. There's 80. This will be the 82nd episode. Normally about 2 plants per episode. So yeah, the number's ticking up there. But there are a lot of plants. So I think I've got a lot of runway. But the less common ones are getting taken, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, which plant did you choose?
I chose Staghorn Sumac. For me, it was one of the first things I learned how to forage and how to identify, period. So, and we have it growing a native version of it that grows natively to Illinois. So we like to make lemonade and stuff with it. So it's a really cool plant. And we used to get them confused with box elder trees when we didn't know anything about plants because we had really bad box elders in our by our house. My mom would be like, "Oh, what are those box elder trees out there?" We just saw these huge crowns of red clusters of stuff, and be like, "Oh, those are those box elder trees." And then I started learning this a few years ago. And now it's like, "Oh no, that's sumac." You get the spice, you can use it, you can cook with it.
Interesting. Okay, so there's a lot to cover there. I think I know sumac. I think I've recently learned to identify it. I've never used it for any foraging context, and I'm pretty like a basic understanding of it. So I don't know, where do you want to start? You want to start with how it's used? You want to start with like I don't know, what fun facts and dazzling details would you like to start with here?
Well, I think one of the big things I think is important to talk about is the fact that I think a lot of people, when they hear sumac, they think, oh my gosh, poison sumac. Like you're
Right.
eating
Yeah.
poison sumac. I've heard that so many times, and it's like, it's in the same family as poison sumac, but it's a completely different genus. So
Aha.
it's safe to eat. Anything that you find in the Rus genus, those sumacs, all of those are edible in that genus. So if you can identify the fact that it's Rus sumac, then you know it's going to be safe to eat. Toxicorigin, actually, I'm definitely saying the Latin name wrong.
Toxicodendron. I know that because they've talked a lot about poison ivy.
Toxicodendron,
Yes. Yeah.
yes. So your poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac, all of that is in
Toxicodendron.
toxicodendron.
Yeah.
Toxicodendron. All of those are in the same genus, and they have the same compound uracil that gives you that really nasty blistering if you get it on you. So all of those have the same chemical that makes you have rashes, and all of it is in the same thing. So that's in the
Yeah.
toxicodendron.
Yeah, the Latin names are definitely, it's a theme on this podcast of mispronouncing those. So don't worry about it. It's always a challenge.
Oh yeah. But everything in that genus is what you want to look out for. But Rus is what I'm talking about. Is where Staghorn sumac is. Illinois, where I'm at, has I think 3 native ones. We have winged sumac, Staghorn, and I think smooth sumac. Staghorn, you can identify. It's gonna have really fuzzy stems on it, like almost kind of like deer antlers.
Oh, okay.
And they also have these very prominent like red crown horns on here. So when you see them, you know it. And these are this species of sumac. You can't juice. So all the seasoning and stuff is on the outside. It's kind of gonna be like a dust that you can kind of just rub off on your fingers, which kind of tastes like Sour Patch Kids. They're really sour and
Ah.
lemony, and they're really good. But so last year you took those berries, and they grow in like I'd say like a compound berry flower stalk. You'll find hundreds of berries just in one flower stalk.
Yeah, they kind of
So
look
we
like
use
they
that.
kind of look like a cone of flowers. Is that right? Like, am I describing that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm They grow on these like very prominent like red cones. But you can make we use it to make lemonade or tea. With it, it's very high. They have a lot of vitamin C content. So if you're sick and you want to like kind of boost your vitamin C content, you can also use sumac for that as well. You can boil it and make a tea or lemonade out of it, or you can cold steam it. Like not cold steam it, but leave it in a cold bowl with cold water for a few days, and that it will be arguably more flavorful. Because sometimes you can, if you boil the stems, and it'll kind of get some of that bitterness in there that you don't want. But
Interesting.
overall, like we mainly use it to as like a nice summertime drink. We'll mix lemons in there, make like this pink lemonade type of deal
Oh,
with it.
cool.
Which I wonder, I don't know if I haven't looked this up myself, but I wonder if sumac is where pink lemonade comes from,
Huh.
because it tastes like lemonade. It's like this very citrusy taste to it, and it's red and pink and has that color. And I think this may be where pink lemonade comes from. I'm not too sure, but it would make sense because what is pink lemonade?
Totally, totally. That's a great theory for sure. Because yeah, a pink lemonade. I mean, there's no. I mean, maybe there are some pinkish lemons somewhere, but they're definitely not common. And I guess if you were like, I'm just putting myself like back when lemonade became popular. If you're like in Illinois in like maybe in like the 1800s, lemons may not be really that accessible all the time, but sumac probably is. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you like that sour sweet beverage, that's an interesting theory. If it's not true, it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've also used it. People use it. It's also grown in the Middle East. They have different varieties of it that grows there. So they use it to make hummus, from seasoning to meats and stuff. When they use it, like they dry the berries out and crush them and use them like that. I'm pretty sure some shawarma restaurants use it too. I'm not too sure. But I haven't used it in a culinary way. I've just used it as like for making drinks or teas and stuff like that.
Interesting. Yeah, that rings a bell now, and I think I had this like confusion in my mind of hearing sumac and not really knowing where it's from. But I guess like some of those genuses of plants, they're like there's different genuses all around the world that and similar uses in different places.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean some of them, like, I think some people will get into this perspective about plants of wanting to just use them, and like sometimes they're just good for the and generally good for the environment, even though they're not necessarily used as like for culinary use. But sometimes the wood of them is good, or you can use them for like bushcraft stuff, like survival stuff too. So there's a whole wide range of stuff that isn't just from eating too. And I think it's interesting when at least when I like started learning this, is like there's so much uses from this that we're not really taking advantage of, or
Mm-hmm.
just like trying to build an environment where we have different things growing and we're using native stuff that grows here that we don't use. I've seen sumac growing so much around here, and I'm surprised that more people aren't using it, or it isn't
Mm-hmm.
a commercial product here in the Midwest, since it grows so prevalent so much and in like in abundance that we aren't using it or seeing it more. Maybe farmers markets have it, but I mean in the sense where more people are using like local flavorings of stuff that is really good to use.
That's a really great point. Something I've thought about a lot. It's come up a number of times on the podcast. I think two things you covered. I think one is that idea, yes, of there's all these things that are so abundant around, and that people don't seem to use them. And I have this like theory, very loose theory, that when things are so abundant, there's no market for them because you can't sell something that's free. Right, and like capitalism can't really deal with something that is completely like abundant, right? So like, but it doesn't mean that you can't like just be part of it and forge it yourself and like take advantage of it and then kind of like extricate yourself at least for a little bit out of that like market system and enjoy like the abundant things. The other thing you said, which really struck with me, is, and I've fallen into this trap a little bit of sometimes always thinking about a plant, about how it can be used, and not thinking about the plant as far as it like just being the plant and how it exists in the ecosystem. And like some plants have really great uses, but also not every plant is for us, right? And not even so that's a really good point. When I was talking about poison ivy in a few episodes ago, one of my guests mentioned that it's like poison ivy. Yeah, that's not for us. It's for the birds. It's for all these other animals that eat it. It's specifically not for us, right? It like it really only affects humans in that way. So, but Staghorn sumac seems to be maybe both. It's good native plant, but also good for making lemonade with.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I know the farmers grow it like along banks of what's it called? They grow them along banks of like farms too to help like as a wind block.
Oh, okay.
But they grow pretty aggressively. Like, we've had one. So the patch that we have growing near us, or on our property, just landed or just started popping up like 3 years ago. And it's at a point now where like it grows similarly to ginger. So there's a lot of there's a rhizome structure that grows under the earth that grows it'll grow shoot far out from the main plant. So you'll have like huge thickets of the sumac growing. It'll probably just be one main plant that's growing, but it just grows and takes over really aggressively. Some people say that it's invasive. It's not necessarily invasive. It is native, but it will, if you let it grow and unmanaged, it will block out a lot of stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I think people often confuse invasive with just like successful, and like an invasive plant is in general a plant that is non-native that is also like too successful. But yeah, I don't think a native plant can be an invasive. You might think it's a weed, you might not like it, but I tend to like be cool with any native plant that's being very successful because often they get outcompeted by the non-native stuff.
Yeah. I think it's cool. Like back to what you said earlier too about like stuff not being for us too. My main focus of why I'm learning this too, or it's like permaculture. So like learning how the environment works with each other and trying to grow plants that that we can use to help build healthier soil so we can get better food production. And two, like kind of like stop monocropping. That's another thing that's a huge like damage to the environment. But like just learning, even if we can't use plants, how do we grow plants that work with each other to benefit the ones that we do want to use? I think poison ivy, like as an example of like it isn't for us, but people use it. Same thing with some honeysuckles. I see that, like I've heard somewhere that you could supposedly eat the flowers. I wouldn't do that.
Of which poison
They have
ivy?
of honeysuckle.
Oh, honeysuckle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We talked about honeysuckle in an episode a while back, and all of the honeysuckle where I live is invasive. There's a couple from Asia. There are some native to North America that I don't know if I've ever seen. I think maybe I'm not sure where you are, but you can't always do the thing. This is what I did as a kid. I'm pretty sure it was invasive honeysuckle. You pull off the like from the back of the flower. You pinch it and you pull it back, and you get this little drip of nectar on the end. And you can that's why it's called a honeysuckle, because you can actually like see a droplet of nectar when you pinch the flower and pull it out. Have you ever done that?
Oh wow, I've actually never done that myself.
Yeah, you can. I think that's fine to do. Audience, don't quote me on this, and always make sure you know what you're doing before you consume it. But I'm pretty sure all honeysuckles, you can do that. You can get the nectar. You don't want to. I think not all the flowers. If you were like try to make tea from the flowers, I think most of them you can, and the berries no. But you can like pinch the back of it, and basically like the like stamen comes out, I guess, which is whatever, or an anther. I'm really bad at the biology, but when you pinch it, one of those biological parts comes out away from the petals, and it brings with it a little drop that you can see on the end of the nectar, which is pretty cool. That's why they have that name. Oh wow! Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, give it a try.
That's why I like to. There's always new stuff. Like you can go to the same place multiple times where you'll see sumac or other stuff growing. You'll always see new stuff or new variations of it or new like insects and stuff that fly to a certain plant. Like there's always something new to learn like doing this.
Totally.
It's great.
And that reminds me of what you said kind of at the beginning of the show. And I can't think of an exact experience like this, but of that idea of where you've like misidentified something for years, or like you haven't learned enough about plants to like really know it. So like you're misidentifying it with box elder, and I think now like you could tell those two apart, no problem, right? Between like sumac and but like I think that a similar experience with a peach tree in my house. I thought it was like I thought it was a young walnut because I was trying to analyze the leaves and I didn't really know what I was looking for, right? And then like you're like, that's like the dumbest thing that I should have known what that was from the beginning. But that it's really interesting how that when you learn to see a plant, then it just becomes so obvious and you can spot it immediately, right? It's an interesting experience.
It's like the new car effect. Oh. You get a new car and then you start seeing it on the road. The more it was always there, but now you're just driving that car.
Totally. Love that. Did we miss any other fun facts or dazzling details about the Staghorn sumac?
Not that I can know of off the top of my. Oh, there's one more thing. Which I don't know how true this is, but I was doing broad research about like all kind of uses of the plant. And supposedly people used to crush up the leaves and put them in like herbal blends for like smoking pipes with like mullein and stuff for like medicinal use. I don't know how true that is or the effects of it. It's one of those things where like like folk medicine, there's supposed belief that there's not enough research done in it to like know what the like prolonged effects of it are.
For sure. Yeah.
But
you read that stuff a lot, and you're like might find one or two references to something that's repeated over and over again, but it's always hard to tell.
Yeah.
Just one last question, and I think you'd answered this earlier, but just to tie the dots together, is it called Staghorn sumac because the branches have that fuzziness like an antler of a young deer, or is it called Staghorn sumac because the flowers are like? Do you know why it's called Staghorn sumac, I guess is my question.
I actually don't know, but if I would make a decent guess, I think it was the first one, because it does look like deer antlers.
Okay.
I think that flower structure is kind of relates to a lot of sumacs, and not just this one. I think this one is specific because it has that really thick velvety coating on the stalks of it.
My sweetie turned sour on me. Yes, my sweetie turned sour on me. Her kisses used to taste like wrong. It tastes to me like vinegar since someone came along. I called her my sugar and how. What a pickle she's got me in now. I left her alone once too often and gee, my sweetie turned sour on me.
Well, thank you for sharing about Staghorn Sumac with me. Do you mind if I share a plant with you?
Oh, not at all.
Cool. So this one, if you might know about this plant, so if you have anything to share, feel free to jump in. And I chose this plant specifically, and maybe you can guess what it is when I say this. I chose this plant specifically because it is a plant that is often confused with sumac, but it is not sumac. Can you guess what I'm talking about?
Like based off the leaves or based off the flowers?
Based off the leaves.
Maybe walnuts, because they both have compound leaves.
Good,
I don't know.
good guess. I'm talking about tree of heaven. Are you familiar with tree of heaven?
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
which I heard a little bit in your voice of a tree of heaven is a very invasive plant, and the reason I chose to talk about it is because it's one of those invasives that I feel like I'm always combating in my yard. Like it pops up so quick, and I'm trying to like keep it at bay, and it's just incredible how fast it pops up. But I learned some fascinating things about this plant. It's one of those things that's like a very very maligned plant, and it is a problem outside of its native range. But it doesn't mean there's not like things to like learn about it, and always we talk about. We said this several times on this podcast. When we talk about invasive plants, when plants are invasive, it's not really their fault, right? They're here. They're doing their thing as a plant. They got brought here by us most times, and they're just succeeding as a plant. So it doesn't mean we need to like not control invasives, but it doesn't mean we need to completely, I think, hate them. So lots of interesting things about this tree. I said it was often confused with sumac. In fact, one of its names. So let me just go back to names here. Its scientific name is Ailanthus altissima, most commonly known, at least in English-speaking countries, as tree of heaven. But it is also sometimes known as stinking sumac, which I didn't know until I read that up. And it's called that because I've never actually gotten close to its flowers, but apparently it smells very bad. And so that's why it's called, because it kind of looks like a sumac, but it stinks. So stinking sumac. Like Toxicodendron and Rhus, it's in the same family, but it is a different genus. So the genus is Ailanthus. But historically, people were trying to like pin down its genus, like back in the day, and different people at different times had it in genus Rhus, and then also had it in genus Toxicodendron for a time, but then decided that it is actually genus Ailanthus. And I think they were a little bit confused with what family to put it in, because it's the only species in Ailanthus that is not tropical. All the rest of the Ailanthus are in tropical regions, and Tree of Heaven is the only one that is in the temperate region. So they were having trouble, I think, pinning it down to what it should be, because it wasn't kind of like anything else in the area. So that's interesting. Let's see what to talk about here. Its name, its Latin name, Ailanthus altissima, is cool. One of my cats is being very noisy. You on? I'm doing a podcast, buddy. It's a Latin name, Ailanthus altissima. So altissima just means tall. So this is the tallest of the Ailanthus. But Ailanthus or Ailanthus pronunciation, I don't know. Ailanthus, it's Ailantus. It's pretty cool because it comes from, and I learned a bunch of stuff just from this word. It comes from an Ambonesian word, and the Ambonese are an ethnic group in Indonesia. I always like it when the scientific names actually take on a native name as opposed to just something that Linnaeus made up or back in the day.
Yeah.
But so it comes from this Ambonesian word, and it means likely either tree of heaven, which is probably where the transliteration into English came from, but probably more accurately, it means tree of the sky, and may just refer to how fast it grows. That it goes up to the sky very quickly. So I always wondered why it was called tree of heaven, because it's like everyone hates it, but it's probably more likely a reference to how fast it grows. Because it's so invasive, actually, it's sometimes called Tree of Hell. Some gardeners jokingly call it Tree of Hell. There's two reasons why you could also call it Tree of Hell that I didn't realize until recently. I mean, the main one is just because it's so hard to deal with as an invasive. But two other reasons is, one, it does produce allelopathic compounds. So those are the compounds in its roots that kill other plants. So it is able to outcompete other plants because it actually prevents germination of other plants near where it grows. And there's a number of plants that do that, but having an invasive that does that is particularly bad. And then the other one, which I didn't realize, is that it's a host to several invasive pests, including the spotted lanternfly. So that do you have that up there yet in Chicago? The spotted lanternfly.
I'm not familiar with it.
Or Illinois.
I'm still learning a little bit about is it taxonomy of insects? There is a word for the research of insects. I don't know.
That's entomology. Yes, entomology.
Yes, entomology. I've gotten a little bit into that, but I haven't really tracked too much of the invasive insects that are coming here. But I don't think we have that over here yet.
The spotted lanternfly over here on the East Coast is it is the last few years, everyone this is the new terrible invasive. It's popping up everywhere. It's just really detrimental to tons of native species. It just devours it. There's all these warnings, if you see a spotted lanternfly, kill it immediately. It is kill on sight invasive species. And apparently it is so prevalent because the tree of heaven is so prevalent. The spotted lanternfly relies on the tree of heaven as part of its life cycle. So because this one plant is so prevalent, and then the spotted lanternfly got introduced relatively recently, even though the tree of heaven has been in North America for quite a while, it has aided in the spread of the super invasive bug. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see it over there. It's going everywhere. I haven't seen it in my really specific area yet, but people not too far away have seen it. And one of my friends up in New York is seeing the little larva all over her garden, and it's a huge problem. So that's one reason why it's bad. Okay. I have two more super fascinating facts about the Tree of Heaven.
Oh yeah, shoot.
One, just quickly, in its native range in China, it is a much less hated tree, and in fact, it's very commonly used in traditional Chinese medicine. Apparently, in some of these ancient Chinese texts, it's one of the first trees mentioned. It was so prominently known. But the aspect of its life in its native Asia that stood out to me is that it is host to a moth called the Ailanthus silk moth, and this is a separate species from the traditional silk moth. So this, I forget the Latin names. Apologies to any entomologists listening to the podcast. But the silk moth that makes the silk that we all kind of know as silk only eats mulberry leaves. Mm-hmm. But there is a separate species of moth that produces a similar silk that only eats a leaf of the Tree of Heaven. And that silk is apparently stronger and cheaper than the silk we know, but it has an inferior texture and gloss. So it's not as expensive, but it's the only other commercial silk in the world besides the one that eats mulberries, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Oh wow! I didn't know there was anything else that produced silk like that. Tree of Heaven was brought over here. I don't wait. How was it brought over here, or is it just?
Yeah, I think it was brought over quite a long time ago as an ornamental tree. Is why it was brought over.
Okay.
Because it grows so fast and it's pretty. It looks nice.
Yeah.
And it grows in really good environment, easily in almost any environment. So I think it was brought over as a street tree and other ornamentals.
Okay, because my follow-up question would have been I wonder if it was brought over similarly to white mulberry trees for silk production, and then it just oh no, now we have this invasive tree that's growing everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that is the story of the white mulberry. I guess it wasn't, even though the Ailanthus silk moth has also been introduced to North America, but unlike I didn't know this till recently either. The moth that we use to make silk has been domesticated for so long, it cannot survive in the wild. It relies on humans to cultivate that moth. Like, it can't chew its way out of its... Because we've bred it to have really thick cocoons, because that's where the silk is. So it normally cannot chew its own way out of its own cocoons. Like, people have to cut the bugs out of the cocoons. The males can't fly anymore because they've been selectively bred for generations and generations. So, like, humans have to actually transfer them to the females. So the silk moth for, like, growing silk is kind of just completely this domesticated creature now. But the Ailanthus silk moth is more of a wild-like moth. And so theoretically, I don't know if anyone's ever done this, theoretically you could track down wild Ailanthus silk moths in North America and collect little bits of silk. It would probably not be worth the effort, but theoretically it could be done.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
really cool. I didn't know I didn't know there was like invasive insects that were hopping on Tree of Heaven. I've only seen it maybe once or twice in person at all.
Oh, wow.
Maybe that's just me not having traveled that much, at least around the States. Like I've been to like around the Midwest, at least for foraging. I didn't start doing this until like a few years ago. So
Sure.
mostly I've just been around the Midwest, and I learned a little bit of stuff from like the East and West Coast that kind of has some like crossover species that go, but I haven't like gone out and looked for it. I think
Yeah.
this year I do want to go out and look at more trees though, because they're really interesting, and they are kind of one of the founding like blocks, if you will, for like growing life and adding to the environment too.
Yeah, totally. I think, there's a good point about Tree of Heaven. I think if you go in places that are good for foraging, you're maybe less likely to run into it because it's better at kind of colonizing disturbed areas and kind of taking over areas that don't have a lot
Okay.
growing. And it has trouble, I was reading, growing in places where there's already an overstory. It has trouble kind of
Okay.
breaking through. It can grow really, really fast if it gets the chance. So if like it grows in an area that's already open, good luck anything else growing below it. But if there's already like a nice canopy, it has trouble. So you won't find it in like a nice like natural forest. But if you like drive down like along roads and just look off along roads, maybe not in Illinois. Around here, it's everywhere though. You see it; it's everywhere along roads. Okay, the last super interesting fact I learned about it is I read about this book. I read about this book recently when I was just thinking about trees in general. So there's this book that's called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's by someone named Betty Smith. It was written in the early 1900s, and it was a very popular book. Has many adaptations into movies and references. It was quite a hit for the time, and it's essentially this semi-autobiographical book about this woman and like her struggles to succeed in kind of from a like lower class family in Brooklyn, and the story is called "The Tree Grows in Brooklyn," and it's actually specifically referencing the Tree of Heaven. And I'll read this one quote from the book now that is kind of like the specific mention of Tree of Heaven. It says, "There's a tree that grows in Brooklyn. Some people call it the Tree of Heaven. No matter where its seed falls, it makes a tree which struggles to reach the sky. It grows in boarded-up lots and out of neglected rubbish heaps. It grows up out of cellar gratings. It is the only tree that grows out of cement. It grows lushly, survives without sun, water, and seemingly without earth. It would be considered beautiful, except that there are too many of it." So, I thought that was a pretty poetic thing about this tree, and maybe kind of the lesson you can learn from this invasive tree is that it is so resilient, right? And I think it can be like,
Yeah.
And I guess the book uses that tree as a metaphor often for the character and how she kind of like succeeds despite having no metaphorical sun, water, or earth to come from. But there's a way to like peek out from the concrete and make your way to the sky.
From nothing grew life.
Totally, totally. So yeah, super. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to say something. I interrupted you. Yeah. So I mean, it's a super fascinating tree. Super complicated. It's invasive, but it has these interesting qualities. Yeah, I didn't expect to like have so many fascinating things to say about this tree that literally I'm like every time one pops up on my radar, like go away. How do you keep popping up? But that's what it does.
Wow. We don't have it's crazy how fast and I think it's good more people are paying attention to invasive plants, but I haven't seen Tree of Heaven out here. And I'm sure it is probably one of those things that does take a long time to kind of manage. It's probably if they got it mixed in, if it's in the same family as cashew, it probably does grow aggressively like kind of sumac does.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, and maybe, I mean, I don't know. It could be. You have to let me know if you start to see it now. You might, if you start having the new car effect when with the Tree of Heaven. Now that we've talked about it, it's possible that it doesn't grow as far north. Because it is a temperate tree, but maybe it does need to be a little bit lower. It gets much colder up there in Illinois than it does down here in Northern Virginia. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if it grows. I actually haven't looked at its range, so maybe that's a function of why it's up there, or maybe it's just you haven't noticed it. Audience, if you know the answer, let me know. I should look up its range. I didn't.
Yeah.
Its invasive range, but yeah, keep an eye out for it. This is a good one. Last thing I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
When I first learned what it looked like, I was like, oh, it looks like sumac. I get it. And so actually, from a distance, two more things to note, audience, sorry, about its biology. It does have pinnately compound leaves, very long compound leaves, very much like sumac. And its seeds form these really dense clusters that are red. And from a distance, it kind of looks like the sumac flowers. But when you get close, you realize that the seeds are samaras, like a maple tree. There are these really dense clusters, though, of those little winged seeds. So when you get close, you can totally, by the flower, you can totally tell it's not sumac. But from a distance...
Are the samaras red?
Yes.
Like a fiery yellow red?
Yes.
I've definitely seen it then now.
Yeah.
Because I don't really... It's probably... That's what those are. I've seen them. Yeah, we have them up here then.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're distinctively like a fiery orange. It's like it kind of has like a gradient.
Yeah.
From like red to... Yep, we have them up here.
Yeah, and when you see them from a distance, when you see them hanging like up in a tree in the distance... and you can't see them close, they kind of look like the way the seed heads on a sumac look. But
yeah,
when you get closer, you're like, oh yeah, that's totally not. So that's a pretty interesting thing about them. But when I first started learning about them, I was like, oh, that's Tree of Heaven. Everything around here is Tree of Heaven, nothing sumac. And then my grandma sent me this picture. She lives near a national park here in Virginia. And she sent me a picture, and she's like, what's this? And I was like, oh, that's just Tree of Heaven. It's invasive. But then I looked closer, and I was like, oh, no. That is sumac. Oh, I just was like writing off anything that might be sumac because of Tree of Heaven, but it's not necessarily the case. We do have sumac around here as well.
Okay, yeah.
I need to start using. I've
highly
never used it
recommend
before.
making lemonade.
I'm gonna do it.
Oh, highly recommend it.
What is the timing for the flowers?
Mid to late summer.
Okay,
but you can get them pretty resilient. The Staghorn variety by us is pretty resilient because they don't have any juice in them. That coating on there stays all the way up until like the kind of early winter.
Oh,
even,
cool.
If the weather's been good, so you can still go out and grab them. You just kind of have. You're then at that point you're competing with like kind of picking through bugs or worrying about the birds getting to them before you do.
Sure.
But still, you can find them. I have like five or six cones that I have saved from last year. And I think they kind of cure better if you have them sitting in a paper bag for a couple months. I don't know if it makes the flavor stronger, but I found that those that I've had saved from last year are working out to be really strong and fragrant compared to the ones that are blooming this year. I did harvest the same time this year, but I don't know if it's like the season's been pushed back from all the dry weather we've been having, or if it's been because I don't know. But I do recommend trying it, keeping it in the paper bag and keep it for as long as you want.
I'm going to try that. I think I know a place in my neighborhood where there is some. I haven't been over there in a little bit, so I don't know what the flower situation is, but I'm going to check it out.
If it's got hairy stalks and fuzzy, and you can like get the zest on your fingers, then that's the Staghorn variety. If it's got juice, then it's probably going to be smooth winged, or another one of the native sumacs. I don't know the distribution that well for the East Coast, but I'm sure it's probably maybe one of the juice varieties then.
Cool. I'll check it out. Yeah, because I don't know. I know it's sumac, but I've never really gotten close enough to it. So, I'm pretty confident in my ability to tell that it's not. It's not necessarily the case. We do have sumac around here as well.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident in my ability to tell that it's not. It's not necessarily the case. We do have sumac around here as well. I'm pretty confident in my ability to tell that it's not. It's not necessarily the case. We do have sumac around here as well. I'm pretty confident in my ability to tell that it's not. not Tree of Heaven now versus the Sumac versus Tree of Heaven, but I don't know what variety it is. So that'll be my next challenge. So thank you for that inspiration to look into the Sumac.
Oh, and I'm definitely going to be looking around. I probably am going to like catalog some of the Tree of Heavens around me, because I have seen them now that I like visually like gradient when you said Samaras with like the gradient, I'm like, what are those trees? I've been seeing those myself and just haven't really picked up a book to kind of go up and identify them.
Yeah, look at the leaves, because there might be a couple other things with Samaras, but if they have those long pinnately compound leaves, like one leaf will be made up of like up to 40 leaflets actually. So like these really long compound leaves, it's definitely Tree of Heaven. But yeah, what a great conversation. Thank you for talking about Sumac, and thank you for letting me share Tree of Heaven with you.
Oh yeah, thanks for sharing Tree of Heaven. I mean, it's great. That's not something that you don't hear too much about it out here. You know, it's a cool plant.
And people tend to like cast off those invasives and not talk about them, and I've liked that on this podcast. I'm always the one on the show talking about the invasive ones because they're the ones that yeah. Anyway, I talk about them a lot because I think they have something to offer, even though they may not have something to offer specifically for our environment. They're interesting plants.
By chance, have you covered autumn olives? Autumn olive trees. We have those really bad up here.
Yes. In fact, do you know? I think he's also in Illinois. Wild Edible World. Do you know that podcast? Michael from Wild Edible World podcast.
Oh no, I haven't heard.
Check him out. I think.
I'd love to. Okay.
I think he's also in Illinois, but he talked about autumn olives, and I'm very curious to see if I can find some around me. I don't know where any are. I don't know where any are specifically. But yeah, like super invasive, but also really, really tasty. Apparently.
I've never tried the berries myself, but I saw that you could make green tea from the leaves if you process them the same way. So I thought I had that idea. So I was like, okay, so if you can process them like green tea, what if you process them and ferment and oxidize them like how you do black tea? And I wonder if I could get kind of like, it's invasive, it's already here. So why not try to use it the best we can, or if there's something that we can use out of it, that would be cool.
Yeah, super
so I
cool.
thought, could you make a black tea out of it?
That's
and
a good
I did,
question.
And it's actually really close to black tea.
That is super cool. That's really fascinating. I did that once with there's a plant I have in my yard called it's what is its Latin name? It's I call it yerba anise. Sometimes it's called Mexican mint marigold. It's in the marigold family. It's called Tagetes lucida, and I did it. It has this like it has like a licorice flavor, but I had that thought too of like, could you process this like black tea? And it worked, and I feel like people aren't like exploiting that method with enough different plants. Like we just do it with tea, and there's not many other plants that people do that commonly with, but it's a really interesting method.
It is, and I feel like there's a lot of like cool things that we could be using to make similar teas with, or making stuff that is native, or even if it's not native, it's starting to become naturalized here. The stuff that is growing that we can use to make stuff that's here already.
Super cool. I have to try that with the autumn olive tea. So you're really enjoying that fermented autumn olive tea, huh?
It came out pretty good. It's really close. To me, it tasted like a fusion between green and black tea. It's like a mix, because green tea kind of has that maybe leafier, earthy taste, whereas black tea kind of has like that. It's like like a roasted taste, more of a roasted taste to it. It doesn't have caffeine in it though. You only get that from the tea plant, but if you want to have a nice drink to have, then it is good.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think that's something I really need to explore more, is just using that method on other kinds of plants, because I feel like that's super cool that you did that, and I'm gonna keep when I try to go on my mission this fall for autumn olives, I'll keep that in mind, because I only learned about those last year and I kind of missed the boat on them, and I need to keep an eye out for them because they're kind of a fall berry, I think. Anyway, I guess the leaves are
but the leaves you can get anytime.
Good call. Anyway, that was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for all the interesting information. And thanks for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Steve. It's been nice.
Did you see it, Papa?
What?
Out the window. Our tree. They've killed it.
Well, will you look at that now?
They didn't have any right to kill it, did they, Papa?
Oh, now, wait a minute. They didn't kill it. Why, they couldn't kill that tree.
Honest?
Why, sure, baby. Don't tell me that tree's gonna lay down and die that easy. Look at that tree. See where it's coming from? Right up out of the cement. Didn't nobody plant it. It didn't ask the cement could it grow. It just couldn't help growing so much it pushed that old cement right out of the way. Well, when you're busting with something like that, can't anybody help it? Like that little old bird up there. Listen to him. He didn't ask anybody could he sing, and he certainly didn't take any lessons. He's so full of singing it's just got to bust out someplace. Why, they could cut that old tree right down to the ground, and a root would push up someplace else in the cement. You wait till spring, Prima Donna, and you'll see.
That was a little clip from the 1945 film version of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Now, let's talk about pink lemonade. I am sad to share with you that the origins of pink lemonade are not related to sumac. The origins are a little bit stranger and not altogether related to plants, but I thought I would share with you anyway what I found because it's pretty entertaining, I must say. So, I found this article called The Unusual Origins of Pink Lemonade in Smithsonian Magazine by Laura Canary, and it's clear that pink lemonade's origins are with the circus. So lemonade is actually a European drink, and that was brought over by European settlers, but pink lemonade itself became popularized and probably has its origins directly in the circus. By like the late 1800s, that was just a thing. Every circus had pink lemonade. But its origins are a little bit curious, and this article breaks down two possible origins, neither of them sumac related, but both very interesting. The first one I'll read the first one I'll read is from an obituary in the New York Times, I think in like 1912 or something like that, and the headline of the obituary is "Inventor of Pink Lemonade, Dead." Very to the point, good headline. I'm going to read this whole obituary here because it's not too long and pretty interesting. So it says, Henry E. Allott, known all through the Middle West as Bunk Allen, member of the old Chicago gambling syndicate, saloon keeper, theatrical promoter, circus man, and inventor of pink lemonade, died here today. At 15, he ran away with a circus and obtained a lemonade concession. One day, while mixing a tub full of the orthodox yellow kind, he dropped some red cinnamon candies in by mistake. The resulting rose-tinted mixture sold so surprisingly well that he continued to dispense his chance discovery. So yes, this claims that it was an accidental drop of some cinnamon candies in the lemonade that caused pink lemonade, and it was so popular that he kept doing it. So that is one origin in the circus with this guy named Henry Allott, who is also a member of a gambling syndicate. Anyway, so what a guy, inventor of pink lemonade and a gambler, saloon keeper, theatrical promoter, circus man. Yeah, I thought that was pretty entertaining. The other origin of pink lemonade is also pretty strange, also not plant related, but is also related to the circus. And this comes from a 1921 book called The Ways of the Circus, Being the Memories and Adventures of George Conklin, Tamer of Lions. And this was a book by a guy named Harvey Root, and it was full of interviews with this famous lion tamer named George Conklin. And George Conklin claims that his brother invented pink lemonade one day. When he was trying to mix up the batch of pink lemonade, he realized that he had ran out of water. And the circus being the kind of show that must go on, he found a tub of water nearby that recently one of the performers had been washing her pink tights in, or her red tights, and the water was pink, and he just proceeded to make the lemonade with the tight water, and that is how he decided to make pink lemonade. So I like the candies version better. I would even like the sumac version better, but that appears not to be true. But yes, maybe the origin of pink lemonade, it has to do with laundry water. So yeah, I think that's all I have to share with you today. So thank you for joining me on this episode of Rootbound. Talk to you on the next episode. My guest on this episode of Rootbound was Shane Alden, aka The Wild Dryad. Shane is a forager and botanist in training. You can follow Shane on all the social medias at The Wild Dryad. If you like Rootbound and you want to help the show keep going, you can find out all the ways you can support the show at rootboundpodcast.com/support, including signing up for the newsletter, which is going to start sending out newsletters very soon. Rootbound is hosted by Sour Steve Ellington. Music by Christian Kriegescota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, enjoy yourself an icy cold glass of pink lemonade, as long as it's not the laundry water kind. Ugh.
Ranunculus!